Why have traditional shift left efforts not reached their potential, and what gaps remain to be closed?
Alert fatigue is one of those big issues. We've been training them to ignore those alerts and only take action when things really blow out of proportion.
Generative AI might speed development, but it doesn't necessarily address what we're really getting at here. So what about deterministic AI? Does it work differently?
Neither approach by itself is the silver bullet. It's all about utilizing the best of both worlds. Use generative to cut through long, tedious tasks and generate a lot of code. Use deterministic to align it to reality, to provide your own set of policies and standards for the organization.
Hello and welcome to the Security Strategist Podcast. Each week we engage with leaders shaping the enterprise technology landscape. I'm your host, Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions. Joining me today is Amit, CEO and co-founder of Gomboc AI. In this episode, Ian and I will explore the shifting landscape between development and security operations. Gartner forecasts that by 2027, 85% of organizations will have adopted DevSecOps methodologies, migrating from traditional DevOps to a more integrated approach that embeds security best practices throughout the software development lifecycle. To dig into how that should best unfold, please join me now in welcoming Ian Amit of Gomboc to the Security Strategist Podcast. Great to have you with us, Ian.
Thanks for having me, Dana. Super excited to join you today.
Likewise. Hey, let's begin at the foundation. Organizations have tried shift-left approaches to integrate security earlier into the development processes for quite some time. But too often, it's fallen short. It hasn't been enough. Why have traditional shift-left efforts not reached their potential, and what gaps remain to be closed?
If we look at this realistically, we realize that shift left from the security vendors has mostly shifted the blame. A lot of vendors are essentially trying to provide alerts and tickets earlier into the process, while not realizing that engineers and developers early in the process are dealing with, a wider kind of set of problems, and security is not really top of mind. So just by pointing things out earlier, it doesn't really help. It's not helping me fix the issues. You're just pointing them out and expecting me to prioritize everything here. So historically, we can see that just by shifting the alerts sooner, the impact is marginal at best.
Going back and getting some traction rather than just alerts, doing actual rework, not having configuration drift, figuring in alert fatigue where people just start ignoring them after a while. These are all major DevOps challenges for engineering teams. So can you walk us through how these issues impact productivity and security, and why solving them matters now more than ever?
Yeah, of course. As you pointed out, alert fatigue is one of those big issues. So again, just by shifting things earlier doesn't really help. The same amount and volume of alerts still exists, especially when we take into account the fact that all of those alerts, or most of them, are false positives. So they're false positives down the line. They're still false positives early in the process. Engineers and developers are kind of accustomed to that. So that alert fatigue, we've been training them to ignore those alerts and only take action when things really blow out of proportion. So if you're just moving things earlier and not being part of the process to fix things, you're not really helping. Rework, configuration drifts, those elements that you've mentioned, again, they just exacerbate that pain. Having to go back and now fix something that I've already released that, actually works. And now I have to make a change just to appease security. Again, the cost of that, I'm not even talking about just the direct cost of time spent, but kind of the overall cost with let's call it, emotional baggage that comes with it is tremendous. And it multiplies the already stressful environment that engineers are dealing with, or the fact that they have that alert fatigue, and now you're forcing them to rework. So that by itself impacts productivity, first and foremost. And as productivity gets deteriorated, security obviously gets hurt as well. And security, again, when we're looking at it from an honest perspective, is not top of mind. It's maybe the third, fourth, fifth element that an engineer thinks about when dealing with infrastructure, when dealing with applications.
Sure, but it's security that has the most potential for the biggest payback if you can do more than blunt instruments early in the process. You need precision, intelligence, and getting it early and often will bring about those security improvements and then create a culture of security enablement. But, one of the things that people have been doing more of course, is using AI technologies during development. And they think that perhaps is going to improve some of these issues. But generative AI might speed development, but it doesn't necessarily address what we're really getting at here. So what about deterministic AI? Does it work differently? Please help us understand that and how it might affect the accuracy and the SecOps defenses against what we might expect from adversarial AI or these long-term issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wholeheartedly agree with you on the security kind of excellence part. I actually call it engineering excellence. I want to be proud in my code. It is secure, it is resilient, it is efficient and fully optimized. That's just part of it, part of engineering excellence. And to your point about, AI and the use of generative AI versus deterministic AI, generative AI is fantastic. Really, I use it on a daily basis, multiple times a day to cut through, long tasks that I used to have to process a lot of material and produce kind of new material or new text or images as needed. However, when we're talking about engineering tasks, I don't need to be that creative. I need to be much more accurate than creative at some points, especially when we're talking about infrastructure. So I actually encourage people to use generative AI for the generative task, for the creative task of creating that 10x code at the same amount of time that I would have created, 1x the code. But the only caveat that comes with that is that generative AI is not designed to be consistent. It's not designed to be accurate. It is a statistical model, which means with that 10x code that you're getting, you're also getting 10x debugs. You're getting 10x debugs. You're now tasked with essentially, 10x legacy code that you have to debug, to own, to kind of reverse engineer and understand how it works in order to modify it to meet production level requirements. Deterministic AI operates in a different space of AI algorithm. It uses decision trees and knowledge graphs. It is much better defined. It is, again, not statistical by nature. It's deterministic. So no, it's not going to be able to generate a lot of code. However, it is able to align existing code, to deliver accuracy and repeatability, which are the two main things that engineers require. So I would say that, neither approach by itself is the silver bullet. It's all about utilizing the best of both worlds. Use generative to cut through long, tedious tasks and generate a lot of code. Use deterministic to align it to reality, to provide your own set of policies and standards for the organizations. You don't want, other people's standards to creep into your environment. So I see that as a much needed complement in that approach to cut through the noise, to cut through a lot of engineering toil and help us deal with those elements in the DevSecOps realm.
Now, I suppose over the next several years, we should expect more tools in that AI toolbox. And so getting ready and understanding that you're not just engineering the code, you're engineering the process and you're engineering how to best use AI in conjunction with the best of human creativity. That's not going to go away, right?
Absolutely. I can still see, sort of an orchestrator that needs to have a mastery to a degree of the different tools, of their pros and cons and where to fit them in. Unfortunately, and again, we've all read the recent reports from MIT, for example, that points out 95% of AI initiatives end up in a failure. And I think that's indicative of the fact that we don't have that a lot of those projects are not created with the right set of controls, with the right set of goals in place and an understanding of what is the right tool for the problem at hand. We've been introduced to this Gen AI kind of magical hammer, and now everything looks like a nail. And we're just trying to use that across the board without an understanding of where is it applicable and where the applicability is not really there, and we need to find other models. So I 100% agree with you, and I think it actually makes the engineering task much more interesting, because you can now use a plethora of different tools to cut through a lot of noise, to cut through a lot of fat and toil that we're used to dealing with.
Sure, and the development executives that can master that toolbox and process, first and foremost, will not only benefit their organization, but of course, their own careers, I should think. We might not have more than 5 or 10% of the white hat projects going very well using AI, but we have to assume that the bad guys, the black hats, might have a higher percentage of success. So they're going to use AI as much as they can, which makes it even more incumbent upon us to do better security earlier in the process. So AI tools here to stay, and you have to be ready on defense and offense, I suppose.
100%. And again, I've spent the majority of my career actually on the red team side, the offensive side. And the saying, as an attacker, you just need to be right once. As a defender, you have to be right all of the time. So again, as an attacker, the selection of AI tools to help me basically scale up phenomenally. I don't need all of those, 10x attempts to be accurate and effective. I just would need one hit. So with the use of AI as an attacker, I'm covering much more ground. I can go way, deeper as far as the depth of the attack. And which means, yes, to your point, as defenders, we have to utilize AI in a way that is, again, much more repeatable. And we cannot risk the lack of predictability, the lack of consistency. As an engineer, when I'm told that someone is providing me with a solution that is statistically close to being correct, what I hear in my mind is, oh, so it's incorrect. And now I have to figure out where that 5%, 2%, 10% of incorrectness is. And that's a lot of work. So again, as a defender, I would rather have tools that are very binary, that are telling me this is either protected from a certain scenario from unfolding or not. And that is something that I can work with, again, in order to combat the scale that AI tools are providing the adversaries.
Yes. All right. So to address some of that scale, we typically use automation. And automation is in some ways swappable with a lot of what AI does. So let's look at some real world examples of where AI-driven and associated automation has reduced risk. If we look at what works, it's going to help us bring more efficiency, productivity, and security earlier and often. So what are the metrics of success that you're seeing?
Honestly, the main metrics of success from a defensive perspective is mean time to remediate. We can see a lot of improvement in mean time to detect in tools that help me kind of shorten that time from an event happening to a detection. I can see a lot of tools that are helping me get context in kind of SOC operations. Again, that's great. But at the end of the day, when we're dealing with the remediation itself, the time to resolution, that is the time that currently takes the most if we're looking at an overall timeline for an incident, because that is still the time that requires the most engineering efforts around it. We've got multiple teams involved, both security as well as engineering, that are actually making the changes. So the mean time to remediate, for me at least, it is the main KPI. If I can shorten that from days, and I've seen customers or organizations that their mean time to remediate is actually weeks. We're talking about critical issues. If I can shorten that to minutes, that is a huge impact to the business. Inadvertently, by the way, a lot of the other metrics that at least we are being measured at, as in Gomboc AI, it goes beyond mean time to remediate. It's also in the DevOps practices, and we're getting measured by DORA metrics that are completely engineering related. And again, as long as we can show that we're reducing the time that it takes an engineer to deal with a given task, that is the metric. It all boils down to time. So that's the main metric.
Okay. And so when we're dealing with complex projects, and many of them can be distributed projects where people are located all over, the team and collaboration aspects become very important. So do these efficiencies affect engineers differently than managers, or how can we make sure that the entire team is benefiting from the increase in automation that leads to those DevSecOps benefits?
That's a great question. So, in my experience, I've seen that fitting into an existing process that's already blessed, that's already practiced by an engineer, yields the best results. There's no point of bolting on some newfangled, or an additional process to something that works, even if it's not efficient. So, my experience has been identifying the existing processes. Most modern organizations and DevOps practices, platform engineering practices, really revolve around GitOps. It is the epicenter of that kind of DevOps infinity loop. Everything happens there. And that is the main enabler for having distributed organizations, for having distributed work, because everything revolves around those changes, the documentation, the collaboration around the Git environment where everyone kind of pitches in and provides their part of the work. So to be successful in that, I would say fit into that process. Be a participant in it. Do not force people out of that process. Meet them where they are and show up as far as doing the work. So if I have, again, I'm slightly biased from a Gomboc perspective. We don't even have a UI for engineers. We participate in that GitOps process. We show up as a reviewer, as a code reviewer, as a code contributor. We provide commits and PRs to an existing code, fully documented. Again, saving the work that someone else would have been tasked with doing and minimizing it only to a review process, which brings me back to make sure that you follow the process. There is no way to completely automate this. Someone needs to own the code. And I've mentioned that before. I can generate 10x the code, but now who owns it? Who debugs it? Who deals with that? So doing that in much tighter kind of iterations and as part of the existing process is really that key to a successful collaboration with an AI. The AI has to fit into the current team process and find the areas where those efficiencies can be delivered in terms of time saving.
Sure. Now, DevOps is all about that efficiency and tracking and auditing around the check-in, the check-out, the builds, the process, the life cycle. Getting to SecOps is adding a third dimension, perhaps, maybe a fourth dimension to something that's already complex. So how are we able to use AI in collaboration to then end up with that better timed remediation benefit? How do we get from DevOps to SecOps without losing time or failing in some part?
I would actually say let's adopt the process that works. Again, you've already covered it. You have the accountability, you have the documentation, you have the collaboration platform that DevOps already has. Why shouldn't SecOps operate in the same way? Why do we need in SecOps to operate based on tickets in multiple places? And why do we have to, to insist on having multiple and excuse the pun, single panes of glass that are just added on top of each other with every new product that we get? Right. Why not use an existing process that works very well, especially in a collaborative fashion, and doesn't distance us from DevOps? From my perspective, SecOps and DevOps should be the same process, should be collaborating again, hence DevSecOps, or in more mature organizations, platform engineering. That line should be completely blurred, and the existing working practices with the engineering elements in them are the ones to be followed rather than the ones from a security perspective. Again, you still get the auditability, the accountability, the governance, all the security elements that we seek in SecOps through a DevOps model. So I would say, again, there's no point of creating two parallel processes and trying to kind of link between them. Let's utilize the one that's already working, that is already operational. Again, DevOps is part of operations. It's not part of security. Their mandate is to deliver, is to account for what's out there and run an existing environment. they know what they're doing, guys. Let's face it. So let's use their own tools, meet them where they are. And in my mind, adapting the AI practices and making sure that they operate within that context is that key to a successful DevOps SecOps collaboration.
Right. And again, recognizing that AOps is going to be part of the mix, that toolbox is going to be expanding probably pretty rapidly. Are we putting too much emphasis on just those one or two first tools in AI? What other aspects of AI should we be thinking about in order to align DevOps and SecOps effectively?
I would think that additional context. So I'm a very iterative kind of person. I like having the foundations solid first. So having DevOps, SecOps operate on the same plane. And then, there's a huge potential for additional AI augmentation of those processes on both sides. First and foremost, I would say knowledge gaps. Again, on both sides, DevOps are dealing with a constantly shifting landscape from a cloud provider perspective, from a, third-party provider perspective. We're talking about, amounts of knowledge that are just untenable for a human to continuously operate within and keep learning. So AI, again, can be a phenomenal help in condensing and contextualizing that knowledge and delivering it in a very tangible, very ready to merge, ready to operate fashion to an engineer. So that's one side. The other side of it is obviously on the security side. Again, I'm coming from that field, catching up with all the latest techniques, with threat intelligence, with the shifting landscape from an attacker perspective. Again, we're already dealing with petabytes of information that we're behind. All the existing automation processes are simply distilling that and doing some statistical analysis things to help us, point the human eye and identify the patterns that are hard to identify by automation. So I truly think that there's a lot of potential for AI to shorten that time to deliver, again, to the human analyst, a much better kind of chewed on piece of work to process and gain a lot of efficiencies on that side. So again, to tell you that I have a very clear path of here's the different areas where that should be applied, I don't. As I said before, let's get the foundationals first so we can get the efficiencies as part of the process, and then, keep expanding in the areas where, just like I said before, let's figure out what's the task that's taking the most, break it down, try to figure out where can we find efficiencies and chunk it up and see how we're compressing that, just like we did with dealing with misconfigurations and security issues in infrastructure. So I love what the future holds for us in terms of AI applicability to the security and engineering practices. But to tell you that I'm the oracle that knows what's coming up next, I wouldn't dare.
Sure. I have to be ready for just about anything, I suppose. So before we wrap up, Ian, help us understand how Gomboc in particular can help us make that transition from these cute acronyms to more of that holistic platform engineering concept. That's, of course, something people have been trying to do for some time. We might have better tools. We have adversaries that are, formidable. How do we make these final steps towards a more holistic life cycle approach that embeds all of the KPIs and all of the needs effectively?
To tell you that we've got the silver bullet to help everything, it would be a lie. What we did at Gomboc is we sort of flipped the script. So, honestly, we started from the security aspect of saying, look, we know that we have a ton of CSPM alerts. We know of the problems. But as security, we weren't able to fix them. And we weren't able to fix them because of the bottleneck in engineering. So we flipped the script and realized, let's focus on the engineering side. Let's talk to the engineers and ask them, where do they spend the most time? What is the most annoying tasks that they don't want to do? And we started there. We started with that knowledge gap. We started with the rework, the misconfigurations, the things that, again, no one really wants to do because it's typically related to someone else's code or, code that I wrote a month ago, which by now is someone else's code. And we found ourselves, as I described before, building a process and building a platform that truly embeds into the existing DevOps and platform engineering practices and finding efficiencies there. Our customers, their engineers are no longer dealing with having to sift through documentation of obscures in the landscape. We're enabling security engineers or managers to define, this is what I expect from the environment. So whether it's a DevOps manager or a CISO, they both come to the platform and in very simple terms, without having to learn some new policy as code language, spell out, I need encryption at rest. I need encryption and translate. I need to make sure that everything is logged and protected and has authentication. So simple terms like that show up in the engineering world as code that's ready to be merged and only has to be, again, audited and reviewed by the engineers. That's basically what we do as a platform. And yes, we're currently catering for both security as well as SRE and cost elements of that practice as we plan to keep expanding and cover, things outside of pure cloud, going into hybrid, going into additional elements of cost cutting and optimization of knowledge gaps.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it for the day. Thank you, Ian Amit, CEO and co-founder at Gomboc AI, for sharing these fascinating insights. This has been a thoughtful discussion about how AI can beneficially bridge the gap between DevOps and SecOps without sacrificing accuracy, security, or timeliness. To our audience, thank you for listening to today's podcast. We hope you found it insightful. For more information on the topics we discussed, head over to www.gomboc.ai. And thank you, Sir Ian, for joining us. Any last thoughts that we should part our time together with?
I just wanted to thank you again, Dana, for the thoughtful conversation, super engaging. Loved spending time with you today. Really appreciate it.
Well, we'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to Security Strategist Podcast on all the major podcast platforms and follow the conversation on X and LinkedIn at EM360Tech. For daily insights and content, also visit EM360Tech.com. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions. Please follow me on LinkedIn. Bye for now.